Hello and welcome to Let's Waffle, another big week in State League football action. John Townsend and Ross Lewis here to talk about everything in the local league. John, is there anything going to stop West Perth? They are the big talking point in WAFL football this week.
Yes, they're flying, aren't they? 7-0, and that's their best start in 106 years, Ross. So it's a pretty good effort. Bill Monahan's got them absolutely going perfectly. And I mean, the good news for them, I guess, is that they haven't got a lot of AFL ins and outs to affect their balance. Strike's going nicely. Mellington won't play for Dockers, so they might lose Strike, but they're not going to lose too many. And that midfield's going beautifully. Their defence is rock tight. Their attack with Jeff Goebbels this week doing really well is on track. I mean,
are they getting cocky though? Are they getting a bit cocky up at Arena Journal?
Yeah, there's no doubt that West Perth are pretty happy with the way they're going, and I reckon the coach wouldn't have a bar of it. I don't think the players are ahead of themselves, and I think they might have just got a little bit ahead of themselves last year when they were 4-0. But certainly there are maybe a couple at higher level are very, very happy with how they're going, and look, good luck to them too, because they're when you're going 7-0, you can afford to give yourself a little pat on the back. But just remember, there's many May premiers who actually don't crack it in September.
Well, the big winners, of course, last week were West Perth, Swan Districts, Claremont and East Fremantle. John Peel, a little bit more competitive, but just not quite, and they're still sitting winless for the season. And we can talk about competitive football, but really it's wins on the board if Peel are going to get rid of that nasty reputation they've got down there.
Yeah, I mean, they were within a kick at half-time in their last three games, only a few points in it.
Their gunner and their couldas and their maybes aren't.
And look, you think that they're going to win a game sooner or later, but what are they adding? Well, not a lot. They play East Perth this week. Maybe that's an opportunity for them to get on the board, because I think the poor old Royals are only just going.
Yeah, we need to talk about East Perth. 20-point loss to Swan Districts. They defeated the Swans at Bassendean, or Steel Blue Oval, whatever you prefer, in round one. And 6 to 7 weeks later, they've struggled in the last quarter particularly. We were certainly in the match in the first half, and then this faded away. John, big problems at East Perth, aren't there?
Yeah.
On and off the field.
Well, they've lost Zach Beck last week, so he's gone now.
Why would Zach Beck have left? Work commitments, or how to go?
I'm sure work commitments have something to do with it, but I think he's also a player he's played there originally. He went to Peel, he left Peel, he went back to East Perth. We know there was an issue about his calf injury a couple of weeks ago when he may not have actually been full and frank with the club about the extent of his injury. There was also that issue with Zach Clark where Freo threatened to move him on, and I think
hasn't played since Zach Clark.
No, they reckon he's got a hip injury.
Why would you move a guy then? Why would you have a discussion with the club to move a guy when you know he's got a hip injury and wouldn't play for 3 weeks? Just to put a rocket under the waffle?
I think there's a bit of that as well, and also that they weren't happy with the way he was being treated perhaps. So I think maybe there's been a few factors coming into it, and that Zach Beck has been found wanting. South Fremantle, clearly a club that needs a ruckman, but my mail is that there is more chance of Adam Hay playing at South Fremantle than Zach Beck. So I reckon we might have seen the last of Zach Beck on a waffle field, which is unfortunate, because I think when he's up and running, he's probably the best tap ruckman in the waffle. I remember a game last year where he had about 50 hit-outs and he absolutely dominated, and when he was up and running, East Perth were unstoppable. Unfortunately, it looks like his career has fizzled out after one AFL game with the Eagles and then a reasonably good career as a state ruckman as well. But I think the Beck situation is just indicative of some real issues at East Perth, and 1-6, they're a long way back. They won't play finals this year, and there's some soul searching to be done there, I think.
Now, Brendan Lee, again, best player for East Perth. I think he'd just about be the favourite for the book medal at the moment, but
it seems well,
it could well be hard to get top votes though on losing sides. It's the same old candidates in the best players each week. It's Wolf, Travers, Sweet, Lee, Smith. There's not much freshness coming into East Perth, and I think too a lack of pace is really costing the Royals.
That's hurt them, and really, I mean, they put a bit of money into buying those forwards or recruiting those forwards, Smith, Pettifer and Polak.
And I think they've averaged 12 goals over the last 5 or 6 weeks.
I mean, we talked about it a bit last week, that one of their problems, the ball. It's all very well to have good winning forwards, but if the ball's not going to be down there a lot, they make it very hard. And I think that's where the problem is. East Perth's defence is really working overtime. They're under enormous pressure, and their midfield, workmanlike, steady, not a lot of class there, and they certainly are right up against it.
What happens at East Perth now? The suggestion is it's highly unlikely that Tony McHale will be coaching them next year. Do they offer an opportunity to a apprentice coach, or bring somebody into the fold? Do they start the succession plan now? It seems to be the buzzword in AFL and some WAFL circles, where you immediately groom someone to take over. Is that where East Perth are at the moment?
Look, I guess it is. I mean, it's they flattered a bit.
And who may be that person?
Well, Michael Braun's the Colts coach, so I guess he's an automatic candidate, or a name to consider. David Hines is the reserves coach, and I guess they're both in the chop if the opportunity arose. I'm sure there'll be plenty of others around the nation too who'd be looking at a senior coaching role. You know, someone like Adam Pickering, who may have coaching ambitions. I think Adam Lang is Swans coach. Swans captain. He's an assistant at Claremont now. I think he's got some coaching ambitions. Mark Webb at Subiaco, he's got coaching ambitions. So there's a few candidates already in the system who might be, look to put their hand up next year.
East Perth have been very strong to a point from within over the last decade, haven't they? Apart from McHale coming in at the turn of the century, Lovell, Marnie have all graduated through the East Perth system. Well, they were in the system at the time.
Buick as well. Glenn Buick.
Yep.
I mean, I think East Perth are at a bit of a low ebb, I think, at the moment. I mean, they did well last year. They got through to the finals, but they had to win their last 7 or 8 games to make it after an ordinary start. Their start this year has been significantly worse, so they're not going to make finals. They're going to be battling to be competitive, I guess. Do they go back to the base and start again? Very difficult, as we know. They've got an ordinary metropolitan zone to pick from. They've got a pretty strong country zone, so they get a lot of players from there. They're not getting a lot of stars from there. That southwest zone down Bridgetown, Pemberton, Manjimup, around there. Not a lot of
Brendan Lee's from that area.
Yeah, good steady supply of reasonable competitive players, but not a lot of stars, I reckon, coming from there. And I reckon that's one of their issues, that they don't have a lot of star power. And when you have a look at the top 3, West Perth, Claremont and South, and maybe Swans as well, there's some big name players there, aren't there, who can really turn a game.
Well, I'm going to throw petrol onto the fire at the moment, but are East Perth a good candidate to become a host club under an AFL reserves situation with West Coast? East Perth are very strongly funded by a group of individuals, you could say, and their zone is also quite ordinary in terms of. But
they're vulnerable. There's no doubt that they're vulnerable, and maybe that is an option. They had the arrangement with the Eagles a decade ago, and that worked in their favour. And in fact, I think a lot more has been made of that than actually probably existed. I think they won that hat-trick of flags based on their very strong core group of WAFL players, and then they topped up a bit. Perhaps one thing about it, I guess, is that because they're based at Leederville with Subiaco, adds a complication to it.
But if West Coast are going to build a new facility at Subiaco once football moves out of Patterson's Stadium, or Patch as I like to call it, and moves to a new venue in Burswood, West Coast have indicated that they're quite happy to stay at Subi. So there hasn't been a lot of infrastructure put in by the East Perth Football Club into Leederville, so they're not walking away from what Subiaco have done. So
you reckon Subi play at Leederville, West Perth play at Joondalup, and East Perth play at Subiaco?
It's the modern WAFL, isn't it?
It could be. Maybe we'll get some night footy there. The lights are certainly bright enough.
Well, it was hard enough for East Perth supporters to cop the fact that they had to go to their arch enemy's ground in the first place. Yeah. So it does help, though, when you win a flag in the first year. That can pacify a few members.
Yeah, it certainly does. And West Perth did that when they moved, and no doubt East Fremantle will be outstanding when they move to their new ground sometime in the 2050s.
I mean, the great irony in this is that East Perth is still in the Foxtel Cup, so they could be champions of the country and can't make the finals in their own state league.
Well, I mean, that's an interesting issue. Do you then really focus on having an impact on that? There's a bit of money to be made there. I'm sure that they'll just try and be competitive week by week, and they'll pick their best available side for the next Foxtel Cup game against the Northern Territory in a week or two. Yep, there's issues in the WAFL and East Perth who a month ago we probably wouldn't have considered them. I think they're now pushing as one of the major issues.
I wonder if it's significant that East Perth was the last club that was contacted by the AFL honchos at the Eagles and Dockers for a chat about the AFL reserves proposal.
Completely irrelevant, I reckon, and I think it's all to do with their president being work commitments and being overseas and unable to, basically a diary issue, I reckon, Ross. Unless you have some mail that I haven't got.
No, I think we'll move on. That's the end of part 1 of Let's Waffle for this week. Please stay with us. We'll be up with part 2 shortly.